it's interesting. I mean, because it's pretty hard to get exact data out of the world. I mean, the majority of the manufacture of vanadium electrolyte occurs in China. The majority of, call it the vanadium flow batteries, are occurring in China. There are some massive batteries that are under construction or have been constructed in China, and some of those manufacturers, Romkey as an example, are moving their cells, into Australia to sort of set up with some companies, one in particular, some joint ventures, but they're certainly talking to others around, supporting vanadium companies in Australia to manufacture batteries. But if I look at the sort of standing equation in Australia, there are a number of companies that are looking to develop their vanadium mines. A few in the west, and around 4 or 5 on the east coast. They're different deposits, and I'll come to that later, but no one is in production at this point in time. And on the east, it's probably, within the next sort of 12 to 18 months that a mine will come online. And on the west coast, it might be a little sooner rather than that, but it's probably a smaller production. So it's early days from that. The electrolyte manufacturer in Australia is again in its sort of infancy. And AVL doing some great stuff on the west. They've got a manufacturing facility that was recently commissioned.
Oh yeah, so heap leaching is a well-known a process used in a number of commodities, in particular copper, but others as well, uranium and gold. It has been used in some smaller scales in nickel. It's being tested by others. We bought the project off of Vale in 2014, and we've through the knowledge of testing and our way of applying it with the knowing the life of the leaching cycle, the dosage of sulfuric acid used in the leaching, we feel like we've really advanced this heap leach to a point where it's ready for commercialization on a large scale. So I think that's the unique part of it. Just to add, because of its design, because of the way it is, and it is relatively simple, even though it is new to nickel, it's low energy. You're not using using pressure as some of the other processes would. So we end up with a very low carbon intense product, so low carbon in it. It's really great ESG credentials, so no tailings facilities, for example.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different points that's worth thinking about. Firstly, I'll start in Quebec. Like many industrial concerns across Canada, we operate in areas and on lands that historically have been Indigenous lands. And, we have Indigenous communities in and around us in the Val-d'Or area, and they have various unique requirements and support that we're able to provide. And, one of the things that we sort of focus on is looking at those communities and saying, look, where can we help you with things like education, with things like medical facilities, and also in very specific circumstances. For example, last year in 23, there were some incredibly serious wildfires in Quebec that threatened the safety and integrity of the Indigenous communities that are near our mining site. And so helping them with heavy equipment, helping them with making sure that they've got appropriate firefighting equipment available to them is an example where we sort of listen to what's required and make sure that we are supporting those communities because of the fact that we operate on Indigenous lands. Now, when you look at Greece and you look at Turkey, as well as, let's say, the community of Val-d'Or around our Quebec operations, working with local communities to bring in as many local employees as possible. And we like to have, in excess of our employees, 90% of them should be local at least, if not more. It's important to say, look, how can we help people get the skills?
Côte d'Ivoire, I would say 10 years ago, made the right decisions when they revamped their mining code. And that was to attract foreign capital in order to enhance their mining industry. Being the world's number one cocoa producer with 40% of the market, they decided to diversify their economy with the mining industry and the oil and gas. May I add, because they've recently made a major discovery off coast that will allow them to become a producing nation. So since the 2014, just before they've had an election. but they've had successful presidential elections over the last couple of 5-year terms. And there has been quite a bit of stability in the country. The GDP of the country has been on average 6% to 7% since I would say close to 8 years now, except for the hiccup, obviously, of COVID. But as of late, the government has been investing heavily on road infrastructure. Had you been traveling to Côte d'Ivoire, I would say 10 years ago, and you would go back today, you would see a world of a difference in terms of the quality of the roads.
Phoenix is an iron ore producer. We're expanding rapidly in the Midwest of Western Australia, which is a unique jurisdiction for iron ore mining. But to step back a bit, what really attracted me originally to Phoenix was watching their success and distinguishing themselves as an emerging explorer developer. There are literally hundreds of ASX listed juniors exploring and completing feasibility studies, and all of them are claiming and presenting to investors that they have a pathway into production. And that's when I first came across Phoenix. And then next time I looked, it seemed a blink in time, they were in production. And that really got my attention. So I acquired some shares in the company. I got to know the board and management. And ultimately that led to me joining the company originally 3 years ago in a non-executive capacity, and then taking on the role several years ago as executive chairman. And so what motivated that was an increasing interest and belief that there is a role for small-scale bulk commodity producers in opening up new regions. It's something that I tried to do in Africa. I didn't believe at that time when I first went to Africa that those opportunities still existed in advanced and developed mining jurisdictions like Australia, and particularly Western Australia. And it's been really exciting and incredibly fulfilling to recognise that they are.
You know, we are between 400,000 and 500,000 ounces of gold equivalent production annually. Today, gold accounts for roughly 85% of revenue for us. This year, we are producing at a tune of, $1 billion in sales, or a little over $1 billion in sales. And 85% of that is gold, 10% silver, and the balance is a bit of lead and zinc pipe. So we're not pursuing the proverbial 1 million ounces of production right now. What we want to do is consolidate or 500,000 ounces with two key attributes. One is the cost. As we have no pricing power in this industry, the best defense we have is be able to produce at or below the global mining industry average for cost, which currently travels around $1,500 per ounce. That's from the all-in sustaining cost perspective. So 500,000 ounces a year with very competitive cost at or below the industry average. And the other attribute is the life of assets. So we're pushing our exploration, our business development initiatives, so we can consolidate our portfolio where all our mines can show a decade plus in reserves.
I think, as you say, it's been 10 long years of a real dearth in the uranium market. But I think as we're sort of going into this global decarbonization, I think most of the governments have sort of taken a bipartisan stand, so we're not so dependent on, everybody seems to be in support of nuclear power, largely because it's low cost, almost zero carbon emissions, and also like just the amount of power that can be actually produced, as compared to oil and gas, it's tremendous. So I think you're starting to see people recognize, or governments recognize, that this is really the key to the pathway to decarbonization. But there's another component and a lot of this that's also driving the demand is AI and cloud storage. It takes 100 times as much power to power any one of those sort of businesses as compared to any traditional sort of industrial business in the past. So there's this huge demand for power coming from that, which obviously can't be pulled off the grid without, disrupting the rest of the communities that are using it. And then also we're talking about new technologies in terms of small modular reactors, which again could be a bit of a game changer.
A lot of people appreciate the rich mineral endowment that Saudi has to offer. My expectation, I haven't been here before, even during the interview it wasn't in country, so it was pretty much sight unseen by the time I got here. But a mine is a mine is a mine. I like the surprise of rocking up and saying that's quite different to what I expected. So, so what's different? You know, you have this mental paradigm of flat shifting sands and sand dunes, and that's just it's not being rude. It's just that mental paradigm that one gets. Where we are, we're sitting in the El Joshin Mountains, about 1,750 metres, very temperate climate compared to the Saudi desert. So I think from a working life perspective, I love it. The geology is sensational. The landscape is sensational. Wildlife is pretty good too. But the business side, I don't think I've worked in a jurisdiction that has such a progressive approach to supporting mining. So, you know, you're obviously aware of Vision 2030, the government's approach to diversification and sustainable development. They actually support what they say they want to achieve. So we have a very supportive regulatory regime, both from a mining and investment and tenement acquisition perspective. So if there's a place to work with true support, I think this is the place from my perspective.